We've seen a lot of human tragedy worldwide inflicted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, we couldn't respond with quick fix remedies. We struggled at global, national, and local levels. Now that we are approaching 3 years since the COVID-19 outbreak, we can already learn many lessons by examining the consequences of the pandemic. The global problem I am focusing on in this presentation, which has been highlighted by the pandemic, is the fact that many students around the world lack access to information and communication technology, or ICT, as well as lack of access to internet services. This problem is exacerbated by insufficient skills of many educators to incorporate the internet and ICT into lesson plans. Over 1/3 of the world's population does not have access to the internet. But the question to ask now is, so what? Many people throughout history have lived happy and productive lives without the internet, right? Some people don't have internet access. So what exactly is the big deal? The simple answer is times have changed. Lack of internet access and ICT limits the ability of people to engage in free expression due to the nature of the internet-connected world we live in. Students that don't have access and ICT resources are not only missing out on opportunities to learn, they are not experiencing the primary global means of free expression. Even when there is access to the internet, not all educators take full advantage. But the fact is, many schools worldwide did not have the infrastructure, teaching experience, digital acuity, or ICT resources to adapt to online learning. Lack of internet and ICT in schools is harder hitting on low-income, BIPOC, and female students. By addressing this issue, we could see improvements to these groups' standard of living and human rights protections. There are two approaches to this global problem that I think can make a difference. The first proposal is a top-down approach that governments can take. Namely, government policies can encourage economic freedom and discourage corruption. The second solution is driven from the bottom up. Local school districts can develop partnerships and enact policies that drive the changes to see broader incorporation of the internet and ICT into curriculum. The global problem of lack of ICT and internet access to vulnerable groups must be addressed by recognizing the ethical and cultural root causes. The most equitable solution to the problem of lack of access to ICT and internet services and the incorporation of online learning in schools that would help the most vulnerable groups worldwide is to increase the economic freedom in developing nations and affected communities. The Fraser Institute measures economic freedom in 5 categories: size of government, legal system and property rights, sound money, freedom to trade internationally, and regulations. By the Institute's measures, nations in the top quartile for economic freedom have over 8.5 times the GDP per capita as those in the bottom quartile. In these top quartile nations, over 90% of their population, including low-income households, BIPOC, and women, has access to the internet. By making improvements in the 5 categories of economic freedom, developing nations can improve their economies, which can lead to increased ICT, internet access, and online learning. Corruption, another aspect that affects economic freedom in developing nations, should be examined as a root cause for limitations on internet expansion and online learning in vulnerable communities. Dr. Max Roser, Program Director of the Oxford Martin Program on Global Development, published on his website, Our World in Data, a graph of the World Bank's GDP per capita data plotted against Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. This graph shows that lower corruption corresponds with increased GDP per capita. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption is a good starting place for recommendations on how to deal with corruption. Their measures include governments appointing anti-corruption bodies and implementing anti-corruption policies and practices. These include instituting codes of conduct for public officials, anti-corruption financial management of public funds, and anti-corruption legal system measures. The UN also proposed solutions to corruption in the private sector, noting that the participation of society can prevent corruption. The UN has also proposed measures to prevent money laundering. So, that is a look at macro level solutions. Now I want to look at ways to address the problem from a more localized bottom-up approach. I believe local school districts worldwide can take action to expand the use of internet and ICT resources. I think there are at least a couple of solutions here. First, local governments and school districts can partner with the private sector to address lack of internet access and ICT. The basis of the partnership can start with school districts appealing to the private sector's interest in the education system, namely developing potential employees as well as providing business opportunities. International corporations such as Amazon, Apple, and Google have school partnerships to help find technology solutions. In addition to private sector partnerships, school districts should maximize the use of their resources by implementing policies that make the best use of ICT and internet services. School districts must effectively train teachers to use technology and the internet. Many teachers themselves are in vulnerable groups and have not had opportunities to expand their ICT and internet skills. School policy can implement training and leverage the partnership they form with the private sector or other organizations to ensure that teachers are able to effectively incorporate online learning and help students use ICT and the internet. While the effects of COVID-19 were felt by most, if not everyone, students who had access to fast, reliable internet were able to mitigate the effects of the pandemic better than those who didn't have access. Now that the effects of the pandemic have faded, we need to remember that many of those same students still don't have access to the advantages internet and ICT provide. There are steps governments and school districts can take today to solve these problems. Those solutions should attempt to solve the root causes of too much corruption and not enough economic freedom, especially in developing nations. School districts shouldn't wait for governments to act. They should form private sector partnerships and establish policies that most effectively use online resources. Solutions to global problems are complicated and difficult, but worthwhile in the end.